Welcome to our Experts at Home series. Today I'm going to interview Dr. Kristin Neff, who is the person who originated research into self-compassion, and which has spawned a whole area of research that I think is so important and that I so admire. So welcome to Dr. Kristin Neff. First of all, this is our series of Experts at Home, and I'm thrilled today to have Dr. Kristin Neff with me. I am really impressed with your work and have found it so useful with my clients. I use your workbook a lot on self-compassion, and I think it'll be really valuable for our listeners. And the first thing I wanted to ask you is, how would you define self-compassion?
Well, self-compassion, quite simply, is just treating yourself with the same kindness, care, concern, support that you would show to a friend or someone else you cared about. So that's kind of the easy way to think of it. More formally, there are actually 3 separate components to self-compassion, all of which have to be there in order to make it a kind of stable and productive mindset. Mindfulness is actually part of self-compassion. We need to be able to be mindful of our pain, to be mindful of moments of suffering, instead of either just running away with them or ignoring them and suppressing them, in order for us to have self-compassion. So mindfulness needs to be there. And also a third element, in addition to mindfulness and kindness, is a sense of common humanity. This is really what differentiates compassion from pity. Self-pity may be poor me, woe is me. With self-compassion, we recognize that life is difficult for everyone. Everyone's imperfect and everyone leads an imperfect life. And that component helps keep it from becoming self-pity.
I think that's so important. I think about somebody I'm working with who has a hard time believing other people suffer like he does. And, it's been something we've talked about and done, some of the exercises from your workbook to try to address, because without that component, you're right, it just makes you different. And even if it's different in some negative way, it's not a helpful position to take. So what got you interested in studying self-compassion?
So I first learned about self-compassion actually my last year of graduate school. It was well over 20 years ago now. And basically my life was a mess. I had just gotten out of a divorce and I was feeling a lot of shame, and was also just under a lot of stress at that point in my life. And I learned mindfulness meditation. And the very first night I went, luckily for me, the woman teaching the class talked about the importance of being compassionate to yourself, to give yourself support and kindness, especially when you're distressed, which I was. And I tried it, and I was really just blown away by the immediate difference it made in terms of getting through my situation, having that sense of support and kindness and care. And then so when I got my job at UT Austin, I decided I wanted to research it. At that point, although people had written about the concept, often using different terms like self-acceptance, no one had really operationally defined or measured it. So I started doing research on it, published my first paper in 2003, and now there's over 2,500 studies, so it's really taken off.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and I think, you really sort of started the whole study of it as, looking at the effect it could have on people, and that's really impressive. Have you noticed, especially during this time of social isolation, social distancing at the very least, that, how people are dealing, how people are feeling so anxious and distressed, is how self-compassion might be particularly helpful at this period of time?
Yeah, well, self-compassion is always helpful whenever times are difficult, but I think especially in times like this, especially since we may not have access to other sources of support we might normally, like our friends or even our extended family. So yeah, I mean, one of the odd advantages of this pandemic is that it's a little harder to fall into the trap of thinking it's just me, because it's a global pandemic. And so in some ways that can ironically help a little bit ease the sense of isolation, at least in terms of feeling isolated because I'm having to deal with this situation. We know that everyone has to deal with this situation. And so that helps a little bit, but still there's still a lot of difficulty and struggle with dealing with, the loneliness, dealing with the uncertainty. Many people have lost their jobs, maybe confronting, financial insecurity. And so in times like these, the more we can, again, first of all, we have to be aware and pause and actually give attention to our struggle. If we just kind of, put a brave face on it and get through it, or if we ignore it and don't think about it, then it builds up inside of us and then it actually might make it worse. So we need to pause and actually take some time out to say, this is really scary. This is really difficult. I feel really lonely. I feel really scared. I don't know what's going to happen. So we need to acknowledge it. And then again, we do need to remember that this is part of being a human being. I mean, we don't have global pandemics very often, but they do happen to human beings. I mean, life, the human condition contains struggle. And so we don't need to waste a lot of time thinking this shouldn't be happening. I don't want this to be happening, because it is happening, right? And then so the more we can kind of open to the humanity of it, recognizing that it's not just us, that this actually is what connects us to other people, that kind of helps reduce that sense of isolation. And then, finally, just anything we can to take care of ourselves, whether that's self-care activities, which people talk about all the time, but, getting exercise, resting, eating well, but especially giving ourselves emotional support, really, asking, well, what do I need to hear right now to get through this? Do you need to remind yourself of your own commitment, remind yourself of your own, the fact that you love yourself, that you care about yourself, that you're going to do everything you can to help yourself get through this difficult time, right? And so really giving yourself that active warmth, care, and support, it helps. It also helps because of the mind-body connection. So it helps us mentally. But what we know is, there's a mind-body connection. So when we soothe and comfort and kind of support ourselves emotionally, what happens is our body calms down, right? Normally when we feel threatened, our sympathetic nervous system reacts, we release cortisol and adrenaline, we're very agitated, and that can lead to health problems, things like hypertension or chronic stress. So what the research shows is when we're self-compassionate, we actually activate the parasympathetic response, right? We calm down, we increase heart rate variability, meaning we're kind of more open and flexible, reduce our cortisol levels, and then our immune function starts improving, and we actually get fewer physical symptoms of illness because our body's in a better place. So really, it shouldn't be overlooked, this mind-body connection, and because we're under a lot of stress physically, it really helps to give us the emotional support we need.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Okay. I know we had a couple of questions on the internet, on Instagram from people. One was about, if how can I feel self-compassion when all I've known is self-criticism, or all I've experienced is being hard on myself?
Right. And so it can feel awkward at first, right? And sometimes it can even feel scary at first. Sometimes when we've kind of closed our heart down to ourselves as a way of dealing with our stress or maybe our past trauma, we open up the doors of our heart and, this protective mechanism feels open, and then sometimes the old pain rushes out, and it can actually be quite scary. And so first of all, we need to allow ourselves to go slowly, right? We say, walk slowly, go farther, right? We don't need to force ourselves to be compassionate if we aren't feeling it, or if it's kind of evoking difficult memories. We can go slowly. But just knowing that, first of all, it's normal and natural for it to feel awkward. But it's actually very doable to give yourself compassion, because everyone has a lot of experience giving compassion to others, right? Most of us know how to be warm, how to be supportive. If a friend comes to us and they're feeling bad about themselves, or, they're struggling in some way, we know what tone of voice to use, we know what words to use. And so all we really need to do is give ourselves permission to treat ourselves the same way, right? And then once we do that, it's really a matter of giving permission and setting our intention to relate to ourselves with more support and kindness. And eventually it flows. But yeah, it does feel awkward. You can actually give yourself compassion for the awkwardness of giving yourself compassion. Oh, this sucks. I really wish it came so easily to me. But it doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
that's okay. That's human, that's normal too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can be kind about the fact that it's difficult to give yourself compassion and just go slowly. If it's a little overwhelming, you can just kind of pull back and maybe, there's giving yourself direct compassion, like saying kind things to yourself. I accept you as you are. I care about you. If that's too much, you can do something else, like pet your cat, right? Find some other way of caring for yourself. It's really setting your intention to give yourself what you need and give yourself the support you need. Also, I have to say, a lot of people are a little afraid of self-compassion because they think it's going to lead them to be complacent, right? A lot of people have actually achieved a lot in their life through self-criticism, and they think, well, I need my self-criticism to achieve things. It's important that people know there's both a yin and a yang element to self-compassion. So the yin element is like the being with ourselves in a kind way, accepting ourselves as we are, kind of soothing, comforting ourselves. It's very important. But there's also an action yang element to self-compassion. So compassion is about the alleviation of suffering. And, think of a firefighter that jumps into a burning building to save the people from being engulfed in flames. That's an act of compassion. And so sometimes with ourselves, we need to take action to alleviate our suffering. And that often means making a change or working hard to achieve our goals. So self-compassion doesn't just mean accepting ourselves as we are. It means we do accept ourselves as we are, but because we care about ourselves and we don't want to suffer and we want to reach our full potential, we also motivate ourselves to reach that potential. The whole difference is, instead of coming from self-criticism, thinking, you better change or else because I'll hate you, the motivation is more like a parent who encourages their child to reach their best. A loving, compassionate parent doesn't indulge their child, doesn't say, yeah, it's fine if you don't go to school, you don't grow, you don't succeed in life. That's not caring,
Uh-huh.
So that the motivation of self-compassion comes from caring, comes from encouragement. It's constructive criticism as opposed to like destructive name calling, which actually doesn't help. And there's a lot of research. If you don't believe me, you can go to my website and check it out. There's a lot of research that shows that self-motivation through encouragement is more sustainable over time than motivation with self-criticism. With self-criticism, what happens is, eventually we will make a mistake because we're human, and then we get down on ourselves, and then we start becoming afraid of failure, and then we start developing performance anxiety, or we may hang our heads in shame, which is not exactly a get up and go mindset, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the motivation of self-compassion comes from, saying, hey, you failed. It's okay, everyone fails. What can I learn from this experience? We're less likely to be anxious about it. We have less fear of failure, and we're more likely to pick ourselves up and keep trying when we fail. So it's actually a more sustainable and more effective form of motivation over time.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'm always saying to people, beating yourself up worked, it'd be one thing. It doesn't very much. It usually leads, like you said, to that sense of just failure and giving up at some point.
I mean, it kind of works. It's like that steam engine. It's like a coal-powered steam engine. It gets you up the hill, but it spits out a lot of smoke, So it's like, there's a better, more effective way to do it. There's like a brand new electric train that doesn't emit carbon dioxide and, can still get you up that hill more efficiently. And that's the motivation of self-compassion.
Yeah, and it was interesting that you compared it to good parenting too, because I think that's true. Parents that are just critical, children end up feeling, badly about themselves and not really trying, But
Yeah,
I think when you have that encouragement, somebody's got your back, they see you realistically. They're not saying you're better than you are, but they're
right.
just, encouraging you to be your best, whatever that is.
That's right. That's right. And giving you support, active support, being an ally. And
Mm-hmm.
if you have an ally at your back, you're going to be more effective in achieving your goals.
Yeah. The other thing I've heard from people is, well, or especially from men, is that, well, it's not macho to have self-compassion. And I was wondering how you address that with people.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that's a misunderstanding of the yin and yang self-compassion. I mean, so compassion and nurturing, they're part of the female gender role. And so people think that means compassion is weak because, women are devalued. So it means that the compassion means weakness, or like I've even had people say like, oh, I don't want to be a sissy, but I can be self-compassionate. So again, with the young part, so think of that firefighter who jumps into a burning building to save people from flames, the incredible acts of courage and bravery that go into being compassionate. That's also the same with being self-compassionate, right? It's a strength, not a weakness. So a really good example of this is all the research that's been done with combat veterans, veterans who'd seen action overseas in Iraq or Afghanistan. And what we know is those veterans who are more self-compassionate about what they went through and the trauma they experienced, and all the combat and violence they saw, those soldiers who are self-compassionate were much less likely to develop post-traumatic stress syndrome. They were less likely to try to commit suicide or abuse alcohol as a way to dealing with all the trauma they had gone through. So basically, when you go into battle, who do you want inside your head? An ally saying, I got your back, you got this, I'm here for you? Or do you want a voice shaming you and criticizing you and, cutting yourself down? Does that really make you stronger? Of course not.
Yeah. I really agree with you.
And so whether it's combat or whether it's divorce or whether it's dealing with cancer, life gets difficult. Self-compassion gives you the strength, the support needed to get through it.
So we had a bit of technical difficulty. We are doing this expert series at home from home. So the interview ended a bit abruptly, but just to let you know, if you want to access more materials from Dr. Kristin Neff, please go to her website. If you have any trouble connecting to that, contact us at PsychAlive and we will get you connected. Where she has some self-compassion exercises and various things. She also has a self-compassion workbook that she co-authored that's available anywhere that you get books. That can be incredibly helpful. That's the one that I reference, that I use with the people that I work with and find so helpful. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this interview with Experts at Home. And again, I want to thank Dr. Kristin Neff for taking the time to be with us. And I hope you enjoy it and that you all are more self-compassionate from hearing about self-compassion.